First of all, Answer Coalition, Act Now to Stop War and End Racism, we're a grassroots coalition, and we have organized many mass demonstrations in the United States because we feel that it's the masses of people taking action together that are going to make the difference, not the politicians. And I think, as you could probably guess, we are opposed to military intervention by the United States and by its allies. And in terms of what might be called humanitarian intervention, like others, we see it as a propaganda ploy to call it humanitarian intervention that's intended to put a pretty face on the intervention, a military intervention, which itself is the most obvious or violent form or manifestation of an imperialist system that serves to enrich multinational corporations and a handful of billionaires. And frankly, if the United States wanted to make a humanitarian intervention in Iraq, if they had wanted to make a humanitarian intervention in 2003 in Iraq, I think they could have paid reparations to the people of Iraq to make up for the war crimes they committed in 1991 and for the suffering that took place during the sanctions regime. Obviously, that's not what they did in 2003. A point I wanted to make was that many times when there's a claim of humanitarian intervention, it's linked to what we call a campaign of demonization against the leader of the country. And a slightly humorous example of that in the United States was that Saddam Hussein began to be referred to as Sodom, as in Sodom and Gomorrah, by the president, by newscasters. He didn't have a last name. He was just Sodom, which isn't even proper. And in our position, our perspective is that it's not necessary to defend every policy or action that the demonized leader has taken, but to stand in defense of self-determination and sovereignty for the nation that's being targeted, and to say that the people of that nation have the right to choose their leader. They have the right to choose the form of government, and to really try to put into perspective the hysteria that's being whipped up that we've seen now happen that I've personally seen done time and time again in the United States, where it really becomes this racist frenzy of dehumanizing not only the leader and substituting that leader for the people of the country. So all of a sudden, it seemed as if there was only one person in Iraq, and that person was Saddam. Yeah, okay, let me move on. We also do oppose economic sanctions, which, like military intervention, are another way to force a nation to bend to the will, speaking as a U.S. citizen, to the will of the United States. And the difference is that sanctions kill, as do bombs or guns, but they kill quietly. And I'm ashamed to say that there were people in the United States, in the so-called peace movement, who actually raised the slogan of "let the sanctions work," posing that as an alternative to a military intervention. The Answer Coalition and the organizations which made up the Answer Coalition strongly opposed both the sanctions in '91, sanctions in 2003, weapons inspections into back at the start of the current war and occupation, because we defended the right of the Iraqi people to be left in peace, to be left alone by the United States, especially after, I don't think the Iraqi people need any more help from the United States government of the nature that they've received. There's also the issue of UN approval. There was a lot that was made up of, well, this intervention, it wasn't as good as the intervention in 1991 because it wasn't approved by the UN, or there wasn't a coalition or a real coalition. I think that, from our perspective, the UN is not a really democratic body that represents the people of the world. As people, I'm sure everyone in this room is well aware, there's a Security Council which represents the most powerful nations, and that body can veto what the majority of the rest of the countries of the world have said, and has done so time and time again. I'm just going to kind of cut to the chase here and say that, I mean, I keep saying we're against this, we're against this, and we're against this, and we're against this. We are for something. You know, there are things. We're not just naysayers. We stand for social justice at home and abroad. And just to give an example, yesterday I went to a protest that took place, a march that took place in Seattle, where I live, to demand for raising the slogan, "Health Care for All." And that's because 1 out of 7 people, or a total of 47 million people in the United States, do not have access to health care. And of the 250 million people who do have health insurance in the United States, many of them are desperately underinsured. And perhaps you've seen the movie Sicko. It gives some very good examples of that. Over 100,000 people every year in the United States die from preventable health problems. At the same time, that's just one example. We have homelessness, cutbacks to education, and many other social problems, all of which could be solved with a generous application of funding. Meanwhile, our government is spending over $3,000 per second on the war in Iraq, and that's probably a drastic underestimation of the amount of money that's being spent on that war. That could go a very long way to resolving a lot of our social problems, as well as helping nations, people abroad who are suffering, really as a direct result of the military and economic policies that the U.S. has taken.